Okay, so the project I'm going to present really links into what Peter and I have been doing, and I think that it completely emerged from my friendship and collaboration with Peter. I don't think any of this would be possible without his inspiration. So a few years ago, I embarked on a project called the Living Museums Project, and it was initially an educational activity. I started on a work with my students, but then the success of this activity led to its incorporation to the Interfaces Network, through which we've done a series of events together. Peter, a few years back, performed one of my works, but he's also been working around some of the most wonderful museums in the world. When we talked to him about art, I think you saw some of his drawings and paintings. He's one of the person who actually lives that. So his deep interest in both worlds has been really important, and therefore his really successful work in museums gave me the initial inspiration. And then one day Peter told me he was playing one of my pieces called Dimorphism, which in itself was one of the first pieces I ever got to write that was inspired by an artifact. He played the British Museum. I wasn't present in that performance, but I know the British Museum really well, and I've heard Peter play the piece before, and I could see myself inside the space experiencing that. And back then I thought I should really do something, not only as a composer, but also as an educator. I compose, I perform, I put concerts on, I try to advocate for new music. I think it's kind of hard to separate those activities of who I am. And in that particular moment, I wanted to see how I could create a series of educational activities that would really utilize this. So my main goal back then was how to transmit this passion that I felt to my students. Sometimes we're passionate about things, but we don't communicate this effectively with our students. And how could I connect the students in Cyprus that really felt isolated back then compared to the students in other parts of Europe? How could I connect them with other talented students studying in different academies? So then I asked around and I figured out that there was an Erasmus intensive program, an IP, funded by the European Union. There's a lot of paperwork involved. Initially, I thought I wasn't going to do it, so I deferred by a year, but then finally I said, I'm really passionate about this, I really should do it. So I wrote the grant proposal, and we're able to get 22,000 euros from the agency to invite all the composers, student composers, student performers, covering their participation in its entirety, flights, accommodation, per diems, getting technology, and so forth. So that was definitely something that I felt very good about. Work with the program was also inspired, or I suppose came out of a desire to address some of the issues I've noticed in different institutions where I happened to teach, and I was fortunate to teach in different parts of the world. And I found out that during the studies, a lot of students perform in different ensembles, but they don't always have the opportunity to collaborate professionally with other ensembles outside the university sphere. So sometimes students seem to live in a bubble, if you like. And also, I felt there was a very rare opportunity, at least when I was an undergraduate student, for composers to have the opportunity of working collaboratively with performers. Sometimes my students would go and ask someone to play the music, and the teacher, who is a famous violinist or a famous pianist, or says, no, you're not supposed to play new music, and that's the end of that. And I felt like we should find ways to kind of break these barriers and encourage students to work together. So developing a collaborative ethos is a prerequisite for all my students. Starting from the very first year, they have to get every single exercise they write, it has to get performed. They have to go out there and find people to work with them. And if they can't also help them, I suggest different students, but that's part of the way of thinking. Like, whatever exercise they're writing, it has to be presented as if it's their most important piece today. It's also crucial for student composers to have the opportunity to try out new material during the creative process, which is what Peter and I have been doing. I have some really scattered ideas, sometimes I don't really even know what I want, and then working with Peter gives me a very kind of profound idea or kind of notion of where things could go. And I find this inspiring, but at the same time, I find this extremely informative. Similarly, student performers don't, as I mentioned before, have the opportunity to work with composers. And I do think, and judged from the feedback I have from student performers that do that it really opens them to completely different worlds. And I think this is something that they also see the benefit. Many students go through the entire formal studies. Maybe they've had the chance to perform professionally. Maybe they had the chance to work with a visiting professor, but not all of them had the chance to put a concert on. And until you put a concert on, you don't really understand the complexities of the whole organization. It's not just about writing the piece and making the parts, it's also understanding the process of putting a concert together. So all these things were really addressing the program that I initially drafted. Some of the challenges of preparing composers for the 21st century, of course, it's challenging to prepare any musician in the 21st century, because unlike other times, today a musician that don't just have to excel in their instruments, they know the instruments really well, or compose at their best, but they must also have other skills. I think 50 years ago, if somebody was a good cellist, they could probably find a good job in an orchestra. I don't think a good cellist today would feel that that's a career option anymore. So it's also encouraging them and opening them to all these different possibilities that they can create for themselves. So they must have strong pedagogical and research skills. They might be asked to do workshops or pre-concert talker or working with kids, which is something we ask all our performers to do in my festival. Fluency in technology, be able to communicate with technology. Also be able to communicate meaningfully with a wide range of audiences. They don't just have one type of audience today. There could be all sorts of audiences from all walks of life, and they should be able to communicate with them very effectively. Having somehow an entrepreneurial mindset to try and think outside the box in many ways. And also the ability to develop partnerships. Partnerships not with other musicians, but also with organizations, with maybe a concert hall, or different foundations. How I set my assignments even today, I think really addresses this point. Is really trying to get hands-on learning, focusing on skills rather than just content, focusing on practice and not just theory. And I've often found that if I'm motivated and inspire students enough, I somehow get them more engaged. And I think that that's a very important aspect. Having the students engaged is very important, because you can talk a lot, but if the student is not there, we don't really get them. So in summing up, as a teacher, I really want to create a program that will give the students the opportunity to develop creative relationships both within the greater culture community, but also with their peers. A program that provides students with a challenging but supportive environment. And that failure that Peter referred to before is what I wanted to say. Students were encouraged to fail in that program, but then they would just have to get up after an hour and fix it. I think it's all part of the learning. Nobody will discover anything unless they have failed at some point. Also, I wanted to be able to connect visual artists and musicians, composers, performers, and also students with the general audience and the general wider community. So back in 2014, I developed this program. Its full title is Living Museums, Collaborative Creation, Performance, and Education, based on museum artifacts. It's a program that blends both theoretical and practical concerns, and it's a program that had an idea of a really deep interdisciplinary approach to it. So we didn't just have composers, performers, we had business students, graphic art students, we have education students, we have visual artists presenting, graphic designers, 3D designers, we had a famous Cypriot artist who just had an intervention inside the museum. It was all like a very interdisciplinary project, all in the space of 2 weeks. So it was a very, very intensive, as the title, intensive program. As I mentioned before, the project itself couldn't happen without the input of Peter, and I think it's something that also told the students there to use that experience as a catapult for future activities. And even today, students write to me from that program and say how inspiring that program was to their development. And I think that this is something that, as an educator, speaks volumes. The setting of the museum itself was the ideal starting point for discussion. The museum itself is a very rich space. It's a space full of inspiration, but also it's a space that connects the history with the future. And I think the students really got that very quickly. The program itself serves as a catalyst for student involvement in various ways, especially for the local musicians. That was even more important because they're connecting with organizations, working within a mile from where they were living, but they never had the chance to work with. So the program itself became an excuse for them to get involved with those organizations. As I mentioned before, we were fortunate to get the program funded, and also got students from the university I was teaching at the time, the Department of Arts at the European University of Cyprus, students from the Royal Conservatory in The Hague, students from the University of Hull in the UK, and also had the partnership of the Cyprus Department of Antiquities and the Cyprus Museum. And I think you can see from the pictures, there's a very stark contrast between the images of these universities, and we saw that the students also came from very different experiences. But at the end, they were able to blend all the learning of those 2 weeks I suppose rather effectively and in a kind of uniform way. The students came from 12 countries, which I thought was also important. We just have 3 countries, the UK, Cyprus, and Holland participating, but the students came from all over the world. So we have students from Cyprus, Holland, Russia, Romania, Spain, Poland, Ecuador, Lithuania, Belgium, Israel, Italy, and the UK. So the cultural experiences of those students also became important for the project. The students talking about their experiences growing up in Ecuador and then moving to Holland, for example, or an Italian living in the UK. I think that was a very important aspect that took place after teaching. So the times we're spending in the coffee shops and the bars relaxing, that became part of the whole education. I think it's hard to distinguish in such an intensive program where the learning stops and where the learning starts. It's all part of the learning process. In terms of the content, we used a combination of daily lectures on compositions and aesthetics. So we started teaching at 8 o'clock in the morning. We had examples of museum interventions given by local artists. We had 3D design classes, not just for graphic artists, but also for composers. And in fact, 2 of the composers are now working with 3D design as well. So they're making their own music and their own visuals. We had lectures on contemporary performance practice by Fedor Tennis, who's then teaching in The Hague, electronic music by Yannis Kyriakidis and Rob Mackay, and then installation work and others. We also have several masterclasses, workshops, roundtable discussions, and collaborative opportunities. The students were informed, they were inspired, but they also engaged. It was a huge task for them to have to build a whole concert in just a space of 2 weeks. And we were very stressed at the beginning, but at the end, I think the success of the project made us convince us all that it is possible. Time is a very fluid perception. You can achieve a lot in 2 days, you can achieve not very much in 2 weeks if you don't have the right circumstances. The museum space in Cyprus became a focal point of a wide range of participatory activities, including the composition and performance of new student works, the creation of visual art pieces, educational workshops, and the project website. And again, some of the students in composition worked on the website, but they also worked on some of the art pieces with the visual art students. And some of the visual art students actually took part in the performance. Maybe they're amateur flute players or amateur guitarists. Everyone is encouraged to kind of join in. The students themselves organized and marketed the concerts. It was communicated from the outset that this is their project. This is not our project. This is a project that they have to put together. So they actually took collective responsibility about that. So that included an original marketing campaign that they had to make their own logos, a concept program, a poster, a flyer, a press release, but also do a website and also a Facebook page and communicate on social media. I think that the students managed to make a lot of connections across the curriculum, so they could see a lot of connections between contemporary performance and composition, 3D design, and perhaps working with algorithmic music, but also how they could market their idea very effectively. So they had a really good idea, how do they communicate this to everyone else? That was also very important of how to elaborate on the project, not just compose something, but also be able to inspire others by talking about it. This is a logo we came up with, and as you can see, it's a very simple design on the right. I'm not sure you can see the connection, but that is the first picture I sent the students on day 2. Now the picture is very practical because it's a plan of the museum itself, and I have locations of plaques and piano. So this is a museum that is very old, and the only place that they had electrical sockets is where I have the blue dots. So somebody wanted to use room number 3, they couldn't because there was no electricity there. They couldn't plug in the equipment. But they also couldn't have the piano different parts because the doors were very narrow. So I sent these, and the students working in design thought of sending them something to stimulate their logo idea, so they came up with that. But we all really liked it at the end, and we went with this. So just to prove that wasn't, just a case that that was the only logo they made. These were some unsuccessful kind of attempts, or some other attempts, if you like, of coming up with logos. Wow. All very different. And we all voted on them. I mean, we all had a meeting together and we said, okay, what do you think is the best logo? And the best logo is the one that happened by accident. So sometimes we discover things by accident, which is really great, I think. We also chose 3 posters. Those are the final 3 posters we used for the publicity, and they're all inspired by artifacts inside the museum. And the interesting thing here is that the students themselves thought using 3 different posters that look like 3 variations of the same theme would be a more exciting way of publicizing the concert. They thought, why should we just use 1 poster? We can use 3 different posters. But then the idea is that how does the audience know that these 3 posters actually are marketing the same event? So they thought a little about theme variations, which is a very good excuse for them to talk about theme variations in music. So we're able to connect different notions of art and music in the same program. This is a final program that we had, and this is the front side. Again, the programs were voted in, so we had actually a form of functional democracy going on in those tweets, which was very refreshing. We also had a central theme where the audience members were the sonic explorers. So the whole idea was that the audience as a sonic explorer of the museum. So in that sense, the idea of a map came about. So the students decided that the best way to do it is to have a program that somebody could actually fold and put in the pockets. So the whole program had to be designed front to back, and then they should be able to basically fold the program, put in the pocket, and then take it out. So also they wanted to recreate the museum experience by giving more freedom of choice to the listener. So the greatest challenge here is to fit all the information in just 1 piece of paper. We didn't want to have a program that people have a hard time putting in their pockets. So it all had to be giving all the precise information about the pieces, but also being fitting a lot in a very small space. So we decided to have composers represented with different symbols inside the museum space. Each piece was performed twice, and the times and locations were given on the page here. So the idea here is that the visitors here had a choice, because the simultaneous performances taken at the same time, the audience could choose which performances they could go to. If they didn't like a piece, they could leave and go to another one. And then they could experience, I suppose, like different pieces at the same time. So if they didn't like one piece, they had a chance to go back. If at some point they changed their mind and thought, okay, I should have given that piece a second listening, they could have come back the following hour and listen to that piece. So I think the greatest challenge in the museum is that somebody could look at the painting, they might not like it, move on. In a concert space, you don't really have this experience. So this is what the students wanted to create here. The form was a 2-hour event, so those 2 performances of each piece, articulated by a work I created, which is called Instinct Thread and Continuum, which is basically more of a prologue, some kind of an interlude, if you like, and also an epilogue. So this is what the students came up with. So as you can see, not unlike a map, a composer is represented by a small symbol. And then there you have the times and the space inside the museum where the piece is performed. So the idea of the map, the sort of explorer, came into perspective in the program, and people literally just took it out of their pockets, unfolded it, said, okay, 8:10, watch this piece because I really like what I saw over there. So that became a very functional way of working with it. And similarly here, we also had other alternative program designs. The program was really selected on simplicity, immediacy, communication, and concise message, but also avoiding visual clutter. The students created Facebook pages, as you can see here, on social media, some different screenshots. Each day they would upload new content to get people excited. They also gave newspaper interviews. They managed to really engage with a lot of journalists. There's a few different articles appearing in the lookup papers, which helped. And then this is just some ideas inside the space, inside the museum. They thought a lot about the lighting inside the museum at the time, so they used electricity, they used lights, and sometimes they used the natural light that was coming in. And then some of the stimuli inside the museum, where the rooms itself, so one of the museums was based on stone, so I think this is kind of moving forward. Another one was based on Egyptian Syrian influences and the use of limestone and marble on the different artifacts. Some of them were interested in the sarcophagus or the scriptures here. One of the pieces that involved singers really couldn't really take place in a different location. The scriptures really influenced everything. Another one is based in this room here. You've seen the Peter very close to that location playing earlier, and some of the figurines, and also by the terracotta statues here found in the Arini. This room was very interesting too because it had a huge space that students could utilize. So one of the students really took inspiration in the size of the room itself rather than the artifacts. And these are some pictures from the concert. And you can see very different setups for a lot of different pieces. And also up there you can see the use of both clay, of stone, which was completely inspired by the museum pieces. If you have time, I can play with a short trailer the students prepared at the end. So for the benefit of time, I'm just gonna jump to the last slide here. So the students found that this information was highly applicable to their professional lives, and they also managed to find information that wasn't covered in traditional curriculum, which is also important. There's not enough time to cover everything in class. Sometimes students should really have a hands-on experience that is outside the classroom setting. Two of my students received professional offers to work with the museum for future events, and they also were able to get a very large and diverse audience. The project itself proposed a series of strategies and actions, not only for myself, but also for the students, hoping to develop an audience for contemporary music. A lot of the actions that Peter and I have been working on were really based on that. And these are just some of the projects we're doing right now for the Living Museums project that became part of Interfaces. This is one, I think the latest one was with Peter playing at the Leventis Art Gallery. And yeah, thank you for listening. Again, this project wouldn't have happened without my work with Peter, and I think it's important to mention, perhaps as a final thought, that the work that we're doing as composers, performers, is not really separate from the work we're doing as educators. And I think that we should really not feel that there should be a schism between those two activities. And this is something that I believe very strongly. Whatever I do with my students is a continuation of what I'm doing in my work, in my daily activities as a composer, as a musician, somebody who's excited about putting music on. So I think that this is the most important part when it comes to the educational side of things, not to feel that we're separate people. So thanks for listening, and
And a wonderful project and such an exciting action within the Interfaces program. One thing you didn't have time to address, but I'm curious about, so I'm going to ask a question, is I saw some kids came to this. I don't need how many people showed up. I mean, that doesn't really matter that much, but did you get some qualitative audience response to this?
Yeah, I think for the kids, the most interesting thing was like going to the museum at night. So they thought, okay, this is a really exciting process because they had a very kind of formative visit in the museums with their schools, which was kind of the more bureaucratic version of what a museum is. But they wanted to experience the museum as a living organism at night. So a couple of the really young kids were actually a little bit scared because it was too dark for them. But the kids that were, I think, over 10 seemed to be extremely engaged. So it's a combination between the kids that there's a lot of darkness, there's a lot of strobe lighting, really loud, sounds, a lot of people around, and that was a little bit too much for them. But for the kids, which were over 10, I think.
And the adults?
Pardon?
And the adults?
The adults, I think, were very surprised by what the museum space could be. And I think some of the adults came because the children wanted to come, and this is something that I was going to link to the UP Sketch, perhaps activities tomorrow, that we've done a series of workshops. But then sometimes the adults were interested and they decided to bring the children. Mm-hmm. The interesting thing was that the museum itself got very interested. This is something that Peter was telling me about before, that sometimes the museum themselves become very excited when they see their space utilized in such a different way. So I think that it was a combination. Sometimes the children became the reason the adults were there, and sometimes the adults were the children with them.
Yes.
As a follow-up to Lee's question, I was fortunate enough to have the pleasure to be there for this event. I was blown away by the public's reaction. I mean, thank you so much for your presentation and dealing from the actor's point of view. But I felt it was really palpable that so many people, whether it was the adults or the kids or whatever, were first of all, sometimes for the first time in their life in a museum and amazed. Sometimes for the first time in their life listening to new music and were amazed. And I was wondering whether you quantified that in any way, that because our theme being bringing new music to new audiences, I mean, you certainly succeeded in doing that. But you know, from an educator's point of view, from an artist's point of view, obviously it's really important, but from the audience point of view, how can we quantify that or qualify that in order to learn more? And it would be interesting, you know, if you could sort of put a little bracelet on everybody who came and then follow them for a year and find out whether they went to the National Museum or went to a traditional concert.
It'll happen.
Well, Peter gave a follow-up concert, I think a few months later, not that long after the recital, and we actually saw some of the children come to that as well. And I think the museum itself gave us an account of how interested. I think Peter maybe.
Yeah, can I give a tangential response, which is the crucial thing for me is what do we learn from the children? I had just to take 1 minute when I was on Svalbard. Workshopping by myself in the gallery. When I was there, a group of about 8 teenagers came in, and some of them started, who's this guy working on the floor? And then a group of them started playing rock, paper, scissors next to me. That was the most, and that became the new piece. So actually, so sometimes it can be, what are you doing? Sometimes it can be the playful, almost distracted response. It can be inspiring. So actually, for the artist, it's not the hard, concrete material. It's the playful aspect, which I get from that.
Yeah, I think, I completely, and I've seen this time and again when we're doing a lot of the activities with Peter. I mean, we're in Larnaca in Cyprus like last 2 or 3 months ago. This group, you know, Peter was playing in this space they had a small iron gate, and we have a beautiful picture of the children just, you know, being like this.
The 4 or 5-year-old kids go,
want to come close to you know, to the violinist, and then the teachers, of course, stop them, which is something else we need to be discussing in different presentations, not allowing them to kind of just run and engage with the music. But I think that I also found that it's a very complex issue because there are a lot of different, for example, just from different schools you get very different approaches. And I think that the teachers themselves are responsible for a lot of these aspects. I've seen teachers that make the kids think that this is something very natural and engage with this, and some of the teachers that made it into this kind of very strict, very formal presentation of what art and what music is about.
I've had to say to a number of teachers, please don't stop the children reacting. I can deal with this. You know, there's nothing worse.
Yeah.
Quick question, because I don't remember, was it free, a free event?
Yes, it was free. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Will you be doing it again?
Yeah, we're doing a series of actions called Living Museums, but in a different format. It was so much work for me to put together that, I mean, in all kind of full disclosure, like it was a lot of work to organize this, to the grant proposal, and if the financial aspect was there, I would really love to do this every year, but it was a very expensive program to be able to get everybody together. And if I feel like I want to do this again with my students in the US, and I think that we'll be able to do it in a different museum. But I think right after I did it, it was just so much work for me that it really stopped me from doing other things that I really wanted to do. I found out that one of the students that did this program came back to Cyprus again a couple of times, and I know that some of the students there want to take this idea and do it with their students in Holland and Belgium. So for me, it was also maybe you know, just putting a seed out there and see what happens. And it was also important to do it in a different way. Like Peter's work in London would be very different because it's a very different cultural setting. In Cyprus, it had to be in a different way. So I'm also trying to be aware of the complexities of the different locations.
Because it was also, it seemed it was a very almost exclusively European take-up.
Yes, it was funded by. Yeah, it was funded by the EU, so it all had to do with universities within the EU, but the students came from different parts of the world. And that gave me very important feedback because there were students from South America as well, that they're not used to this kind of, they have very formal education, and they're not used to, they're not being used to being the decision makers. When I think we teach, we make a lot of decisions and we don't leave decisions to the students, and I really have a problem with that. I think the students should decide a lot of things. So when I teach now, I have like this every 2 week feedback sessions with students in kind of discussing, okay, where we are, having this kind of group mentality, but actually allowing them to decide what they want to do next. I think it's important to get them engaged in that way.
I think one of the most powerful things about what you have set up there is the kind of holistic, total experience of putting something together and realizing that it doesn't happen of itself. You have to offer this to people, but you have to get them to come. What does this involve? And then interacting with them. So I kind of like the rock, paper, scissors thing.
Yeah.
Because it is interaction and getting some feedback. It may be a superficial or an extreme case, but there's so many extra aspects that one would not normally get learning their musical trade, which I really find excellent. I'd like to thank Evis ever so much.